I would love if you could define for me what a petroglyph is and what the value of protecting and preserving these petroglyphs are.
Yeah, absolutely. So petroglyphs are one category of what we would call rock imagery. People have in the past drawn on rocks with paint like ochre, and then they've also used a hammer and chisel method to create a mark on rock, and that mark lasts for a really long time. That's most of what we see here in Utah are these petroglyphs, rock writing. Um, and so rock writing and petroglyphs, they're really important spatial markers in a lot of cases. Um, some aspects of archaeology are portable. If someone made a basket, they're probably going to be traveling with that basket. But people travel to rock imagery and rock writing. It is a method of making a space and making a place and imbuing it with meaning. So I am not a member of a descendant community that traditionally had rock writing, at least not on this continent. And so I don't know particularly what that interpretation is, what that spiritual and sacred significance is, but I understand that it exists for a lot of people contemporarily today. And so it's important that these places sort of stay together when possible, when it's reasonable to do. And we can talk a little bit about the laws that sort of separate what we would like to do from our highest form of ethics to what legally people are required and not required to do when they encounter these sorts of archaeology.
Yes, I would love to get into that. But first, I just want to ask, like you said, these are spatial markers. So when they're moved or disrupted, how does that sort of disrupt their meaning, given that they are kind of specific to a space?
Yeah, so from an archaeological standpoint, and again, I can't speak from a descendant standpoint, I'm not a member of those communities, but from an archaeologist standpoint, we look for data. And one of the ways that we make data is looking at spatial locations. So when things get moved, and particularly in this case, I'm thinking of like artifacts, if someone finds an arrowhead and they walk away with it, or even if they just move it to a different part of the site, that changes the story that we're able to tell about that site. So things that are really located and spatially linked to a place, that's a really important form of knowledge, but it's also a really fragile form of knowledge. And so it's one that we do see disappearing as we have more and more people out and around, and we're all trying to educate each other on what are the right things to do in these places and spaces.
And how is that complicated or made more difficult by expansion and growth, like we see so often here in Southern Utah?
Yeah, expansion and growth, when you're thinking about a cultural landscape or a natural landscape, you can think of it in terms of those factors that cause friction, right? You think about all of the dynamics that exist within the WUI, the wildland urban interface, where we're seeing it in Los Angeles right now with forest fires that have come into the urban space because in that corridor, things can cross through. Wild things can come in and our urban things go out. And so in the archaeological realm, we are concerned about our urbanness extending out into that wilderness area where it hadn't before. And so these things don't necessarily need to be in conflict. The way that we can get out of conflict is through better education and a better sense of community and understanding our community values and what different community members might value, because we don't all experience things in the same way. And so just having a strong community, and I know St. George does have a really vibrant, strong community, and you have so many different members of your community, from climbers and cyclists and potters and students. You have an amazing array of folks out there. And so as we move forward and as we are getting into that wildland urban interface, it's really important that we do have conversations about what we value, what we think is important, and how we want to achieve those values.
Thank you for that. So well said. So now I do want to get into some of the legal protections. I know that there's probably big differences depending on what land this is and the jurisdiction of that land, but just generally, perhaps to start, what are the protections for these archaeological sites?
Right. Yeah. So when we're thinking about archaeology on different types of land, whether that's private, municipal, state, or federal, we do think about them in terms of protections. Maybe that is, or maybe that isn't. We scratch that part. So we do think about these things in terms of what the law is responsible for doing on private, federal, municipal land. So when we're on state and federal lands, or if we are using state or federal funds or using state or federal permits, there are laws that come into place. Any of those things can trigger that law. Something like Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act can come into play. And then on the state side, we have something called 9-8-404, which is our state's version of the National Historic Preservation Act. On private land and on most municipal lands, those laws do not come into play. Utah is a state where we do really want to be able to protect private property rights, and we do believe that people have the ability to make wise decisions for their land. And so we don't have not regulations. So we don't have policies in place that say thou shalt, discover what's on your property, evaluate it for its importance, and make plans for whether you should try to avoid a site or protect a site in some way. We do have laws that come into place if you are going to find human remains. So that is something we do take very seriously. And anytime that someone believes they found human remains, in order to stay compliant with the law, we recommend that you stop all activity in that area and call local law enforcement. If it is human remains, they'll be able to identify it, and they'll contact Dr. Dorina Kopp at our office, our state forensic anthropologist, and she can make that determination if they are human remains and if they are ancient human remains. And you don't need to feel worried about calling, because in pretty much every case, our office will be able to send experts out for free often and deal with those remains for you. So please call if you think you found human remains.
So thank you so much for that clarification. And it's very clear what you do if you find human remains. But when it comes to developing land, like private lands, like you said, is it ultimately up to the owner to determine what to do if they were to find, say, a petroglyph on their land?
It is ultimately up to the owner to determine what they want to do if they find something like a petroglyph on the land. It is private land. Like I said, out here in Utah, we really do want to put a lot of authority in that private landowner. It's their land, and we don't want to get too much in the way telling them what to do.
Is there any requirement at all if you were to, when you're developing, stumble upon an archaeological site that didn't have human remains but may have some artifacts there? Is there any requirement to report that to your office or any other office?
There is no legal requirement to report any archaeological discovery. So my office, the State Historic Preservation Office, we are the state repository for information about archaeological records. And so we get a lot of calls. We get a lot of emails, and we get a lot of photographs sent to us about archaeological discoveries all the time. And we love that. We'll take that at any time. And if we're out and about and like in an area, we're even able to swing by and double check something for someone. And we're always available for private landowners if they want to learn more about something on their property, or if they want some recommendations on what they can do to protect something.
Thank you. Makes a lot of sense. It's really great clarification. For anyone who, like, this particular situation in St. George, someone witnessed builders moving a petroglyph in a known area. For people who are concerned about the potential removal or destruction of petroglyphs, do you have any resources they could reach out to?
What exactly do you mean? Because like I said, it's on private land, so There's not a
Yeah.
resource. Yeah,
Yeah, I guess that totally suffices. I think I've just seen people pretty upset about it and not
yeah,
sure what the recourse is, but if it's, hey, we're on public land or we're on private land, so there's really not much anyone can do, that I think is vital information.
yeah, I think that's it. On public lands, if you do see someone disturbing things, you can call law enforcement. If you're on BLM land, you can call BLM. In fact, where you guys are in St. George, I know you can even call your county officials, and they all talk to each other, the county officials and all of the land management law enforcement. So if you are out and around, if you're in, Snow Canyon State Park, or you're out mountain biking on BLM land, please feel free to call and report something. Photographs are always great. We don't recommend approaching someone who is engaging in illegal activity. Um, you, the living person, are much more important. We want to make sure that people stay safe. But when you do see things that are happening on private property, I think the only thing you can do is what you would do with any neighbor. You can say, this is important to me and I value this. But if they don't want to hear that, or they don't want to change their actions, you need to respect that, because they are not breaking the law.
Thank you so much for that. This is so helpful. Is there anything else you wanted to add or you feel like we didn't cover?
Just really briefly, our office has actually just finished a grant program that the city of St. George was able to take advantage of a couple of times. And it was for private landowners to be able to survey their property, to make archaeological discoveries, to interpret things, to nominate them to the National Historic Record, and if they wanted to implement some protections to places too. So like I said, that grant has just ended. It was a one-time grant fund from the legislature, and it was wonderful. But I want you guys to know that the city of St. George has been working hard on your behalf, and you should be able to see some really incredible interpretive signs popping up in the next year or two.
Thank you so much. This offered so much clarity, and that's really what I was looking for. Are they doing anything wrong? And it doesn't seem like they are. So I appreciate all the insight and really helps round out the story.
Yeah, it's hard because whether or not we are members of a descendant community, we feel really strongly about the things that make our space and have made our place. And even if this isn't a meaning that, you have ancestral knowledge of, it's hard when something changes in your landscape. And especially if you felt a personal attachment to it, but it was on someone's private land. I know that it is very hard. And I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say. Like, it's hard. It is hard.
Yeah, I think you highlighted really well the balance between your right to, develop your own land and protecting that while also having this pull between I want to protect the, history that's on these lands. And that does seem like that could be in conflict in a place like Utah, where there's, like you said, it's just imbued with ancient artifacts. But also we're a growing state, and I'm sure it just is something that happens all the time.
It does. Yeah. I mean, like you said, we're a growing state, and even the federal and state laws, we're not trying to stand in the way of that growth. And we're not trying to stand in the way of getting Utahns what they need, like new water lines, new ways of generating electricity. We have archaeological crews going out all the time to check on grounds that are BLM, that are Forest Service. And within the confines of those laws, we do make decisions about, well, maybe we should scooch something over here. Maybe we should, do something to this site to protect it and preserve it. But projects don't get stopped because we are living people, and we do have real needs.